And we have some people just jumping in here. There's Steve. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Tim. Hey, Kendrick. Hey, Dave.
Good to see you, Steve.
Good thing we're virtual today. It's too hot outside.
Yeah, we thought about having it out in the parking lot, but that would probably mess up Dr. Johnson's hairdo, and we didn't want to do that.
Yeah. See, that's not a concern I have anymore. So we'd be okay. I'd melt, but my hair would be fine.
You'd get yourself a nice sunburn like me.
Yeah, exactly.
On the top of the head there.
I'm chasing after you. My wife has got me on Rogaine to keep some hairs on top of my head.
We'll give it just a couple minutes, and then we'll start. Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah,
it's fine. Yeah,
audio's good.
Good.
And when do you expect you'll put this out?
We'll be putting pieces of it out, through LinkedIn and that probably starting in a couple weeks. And I know that's when Rosetta Fest is, so we'll try and match up some things there with Health Rosetta from that as well. So just trying to stir some interest. We in Arizona in the summer, not a whole lot seems to happen. It seems like in June and July, but it's obviously for benefit plans and for employers, it's still an important time to be making decisions. So we want to get this out to them before they get to, finalizing some of those decisions, and let them know that there are options out there, which is, really why we're excited to talk to you today.
Sounds good.
Good. Dr. Johnson, you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Arizona chapter of the Free Market Medical Association. Our goal today and always is to connect employers and individuals who need healthcare with transparent, value-driven solutions that make healthcare more effective and affordable. And our guest today is somebody who's probably made more impact in that space than just about anybody I can think of. Dave Chase is a highly influential entrepreneur and healthcare advocate, known for his groundbreaking work in transforming the healthcare industry. As the co-founder of the Health Rosetta ecosystem, he has dedicated himself to promoting transparency and reform in healthcare delivery and employee benefits. With a background in technology startups and venture capital, Dave recognized the need for change in an industry plagued by rising costs and inefficiencies. Through Health Rosetta, he provides guidance and tools for employers, advisors, and individuals to navigate the healthcare landscape more effectively, demanding better value and outcomes. Dave's visionary leadership and passion for patient-centered care have continued to inspire a movement that promises to reshape healthcare and improve lives worldwide. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Dave, and Tim Spooner, our co-founder of the Arizona chapter of the Free Market Medical Association. We'll be asking you some questions, and we'll also invite questions from the audience. So feel free to post your questions in the chat.
Great.
I'm looking forward to our chat.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. It's a pleasure to talk with Dave, with you again, Dave, and really see. We want to kind of sort of mark the progress that's happened as well over the years. I know the first book that I read, The CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream, was very influential for me. Can you tell us? In that book, you wrote that it's the employer's responsibility to restore the American dream. And why do you say that? Why is that so important?
Well, hopefully most of this conversation will focus in on the what's possible and what's happening, but I think it is important to level set a little bit. So I'm going to go negative for a minute or two, and I think I'll kind of answer that question. And I'll start with what's a surprising statement to most people, I'll say healthcare is not expensive, right? It's, after all, clinicians only get 27 cents of every dollar ostensibly spent on healthcare. What's expensive is profiteering, price gouging, administrative bloat, fraud, and that sort of thing. And what we waste in our system is well documented. It's by PwC, National Academy of Medicine, larger than the entire Russian economy is what we waste. Sure. And that's coming out of the working middle class pockets. And that's what essentially resulted in what I called in a Forbes piece, the greatest heist in American history. 30 years of wage gain stolen by the healthcare system. And it's not, like I said, clinician pay is pretty much tracked with inflation. But unfortunately, you've got 78% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. We're the undisputed world leaders in medical bill-driven bankruptcy, and 70% of those people had, in air quotes, insurance. I don't think you can really call it insurance if it doesn't protect you from bankruptcy. And if you look forward, an optimistic view where healthcare only grows at half the rate of regular inflation, which is pretty rare for that to happen, millennials will spend over half their lifetime earnings on healthcare, the average millennial. And if you actually had healthcare growing at the rate of regular inflation, again, it usually way surpasses that, you're talking 2/3 to 3/4 of their lifetime earnings. And, the final sort of rough point I'll make is the first 20 years of the opioid crisis were funded and fueled by employer health plans. And, I don't have to tell you, Tim, as somebody who's been trained in physical therapy, if we just treated lower back pain well in this country, as Norm, I'm sure you do, but unfortunately not every employer does. I mean, even this day, with all the awareness around the opioid crisis, with 4.6% of the world's population, we're driving 80% of the opioid prescriptions, even today. So that's the negative backdrop, right? There's a lot at stake. You've put, the system has put people under severe duress. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we have now many, many examples where we call it the health Rosetta dividend, basically taking what was waste and turn it into well-being. And, there's no reason when you've got a good plan to cost shift onto the backs of members who can't afford it. And so we, have these plans that you make a wise decision. There should be no deductible. I mean, it's crazy. We have, for the things that actually work and affordable, like primary care and PT, we put barriers up. And then the things that are like absurdly overpriced and often inappropriate, it's a, unlimited corporate credit card. So we have things way backwards. And there's all kinds of things that you think about the American dream. What we call the health Rosetta dividend has been turned into this well-being, whether it's, just the number one determinant of health in America is income. So we're putting money back in people's pockets, adding dependent coverage back in, people getting raises that are actually net raises. They're not all eaten up by health premium increases, bonuses, free healthy meals, home solar being subsidized, college education. These are the things that allow people to thrive. And to me, that's in sort of reach their full potential, which is to me what the American dream is all about.
Yeah, that's great. And you kind of, you've said it in different talks and in your books where, every business owner is in the healthcare business, whether they think they are or not. So you're kind of illustrating the importance of that point. And, another thing, when I watched one of your TED Talks, you said that healthcare is already fixed. What do you mean by that? And what can an employer who's listening to this say? What do you mean it's fixed? I keep seeing my premiums go up and up and up. If it's fixed, why isn't it? Why am I not able to enjoy that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's both a true and aspirational statement. You could also use the other definition of fixed and it kind of is fixed in that way. It's kind of a fixed or rigged game, but it's fixed in the sense that all the solutions to solve the healthcare problems, which are really defined by health plans. I mean, health plans are effectively the laws of what I call healthcareistan. This, it'd be the fourth largest economy in the world, what we spend in healthcare. And the health plans basically are the laws in effect that govern plans. And if you look at the examples that I've written about in my books, I mean, you have some employers who've been doing it for 30 years, have cumulatively saved over $500 million with a B. And so what we did, I kind of joke, my LinkedIn profile, I'm an archaeologist because I just went digging for kind of the Rosetta Stone, because for a lot of people, healthcare is indecipherable as Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so I didn't have to climb to the top of some summit, cross my legs, dream this stuff up. People were doing it. It was just digging hard enough. And then, I kind of went from archaeologist to Johnny Appleseed. So what we're doing now is like tease out what are the actual elements of that lead me to say it's fixed, and then make it easy for anybody to adopt that. And that's really what our movement's about, is make it much easier for people to A, be aware, B, do it. And it does come down to you got to work with the right folks. That's why really the tip of the spear for us was accrediting these people who build health plans. Typically they're called benefits brokers or benefits consultants or benefits advisors. So we accredit them. The best ones of those are worth their weight in gold. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of misincentives, and you can take things like an easy fix relatively is the area around drug procurement. There's these companies that normal human beings have never heard of called pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. The three big PBMs, who have probably 80-90% market share, they're all Fortune 15 companies. And there's actually not one pure pharma company in the Fortune 50. There's J&J is the only one in the Fortune 50, and they have a bunch of other lines of business. Not to let them off the hook, but that shows you just how absurdly profitable the PBM space. And, if you want to call it good news in air quotes, the good news is the shenanigans are so extreme that once you're awakened to it, it's very easy. That's a great starting point to start fixing your health plan. And then that can, we see organizations, sometimes they'll start there and then they'll go fund proper primary care that includes PT, for example. And just that virtuous cycle just gets stronger and stronger and stronger over time. So those would be some of the things that jump out at me when I talk about it being fixed. It's there for anybody who wants it.
So from a kind of a shameless plug then, tell us a little bit more about Health Rosetta. And you said you're certifying advisors. Tell us some of the other things that you're doing at Health Rosetta that an employer is saying, hey, I've got to make some different steps. I've got to take some steps to improve my benefit offering or the ROI that I'm currently spending on my health benefits. What are some of the things that Health Rosetta is doing that you would suggest an employer take advantage of?
Yeah, it really just depends on where they're at in the journey. The first thing is just make sure you're educated. If you're not already educated on this, so you can go to our website, healthrosetta.org, and we offer free downloads of my books. You can get PDF. There's executive summaries of 2 of the books. There's webinars we're doing. There's newsletters. We have an annual gathering called Rosetta Fest that's in Chicago this year in August. And so there's just get educated. And then if you're in or want to be in the benefits consulting, benefits advising business, in Forbes, I called that the most underestimated role in the entire US economy. And we have people who are literally, senior health policy advisor out of the White House came straight to this role because it was the only bright spot she saw in healthcare. We We have former, we have doctors, PTs, management consultants, tech industry people who've made career switches, DPC docs who are actually doing both, a practice and doing that. And then one of the things that I look at as a great opportunity for every employer is, I kind of joke and sort of observed early on that I could literally go on Amazon and get 5,600 different reviews for toenail clippers, for one brand of toenail clippers. And there's no objective mark of value of health plans for trillions of dollars to spend, which seems kind of absurd. So we embarked on what basically became a 5-year journey to come up with what amounts to giving you a second opinion on your health plan, given the lives that are on the line, right? The third leading cause of death in America is preventable medical mistakes. We design plans that avoid that. By the end of the decade, the 10th leading cause of death is expected to be the cost of medications. People can't afford their medications, therefore, that leads to their demise. And so, to use a medical metaphor, because we're talking to FMMA folks here, think of it that we call it a plan grader, right? Even if you're not a health plan wonk, you'll understand that a 15 out of 100 isn't as good as a 65 out of 100. And so, to use a medical metaphor, we give you a diagnostic score in 8 key areas, basically the 8 areas of the Health Rosetta blueprint. And then we give you the prescription or the care plan on how to nurse that health plan back to full health, so it actually is delivering what it should. Of course, we think health plans should promote health. Unfortunately, they've promoted the demise of the American dream and led to the things we were talking about earlier. So, that's something where you can contact us or go to healthrosetta.org/map, find somebody who's accredited in your area and get that second opinion. There's no cost to that. And it will produce that care plan or prescription that I talked about metaphorically, produces a 30-page report that will basically give you, here's how to get educated on that. There'll be some education, but here's the things you can do and the considerations. And it's a great tool for people to tap into. So there's other things we're doing, but I would just stop there as kind of good highlights.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And having gone through it definitely helps you as an employer understand where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. For some of the employers that are listening, you've thrown out a bunch of different numbers, and if they're trying to make make a decision, what are some of the financial impacts that the non-decision or the person who is just on the fence and not making a choice, what are some of the financial implications that have happened, maybe say over the last decade, but what do you see is continuing to happen to them, by not making these decisions and taking back control of their health plan?
Yeah, there's a big picture answer to that, and then I'll give you a company specific kind of ground level picture. Big picture, I'm old enough to remember the headlines and news articles back, 20, 30 years ago, where there was talk about how every GM vehicle had a $2,000 premium attached to it because of healthcare costs. And that was true throughout, kind of equivalent throughout the manufacturing industry. And so rather than address the root cause of that, the so-called solution was just to ship jobs overseas, and thus the hollowing out of our manufacturing base. And so it's had a devastating impact on communities around the country. And then when you get into specific companies, right, it's often the second or third biggest cost, right after payroll. And one of the case studies that I have in my book is a company called Pacific Steel and Recycling. They're about 700 people. They were spending 6 years ago over $8 million on health benefits. And by now they were projected to be spending over $10 million, but they chose a different path. They implemented this blueprint. The last 3 years, and one of those years was a really bad claims year in terms of extra cancers above average and a really bad heart situation that led to a death of an employee. Despite that, the last 3 years, they've spent under $3.5 million. So went from 8 to under 3.5. And that's a low margin, slow growth manufacturing business to have the same impact on the bottom line profit for that organization. They would have had to increase top line sales revenue 25 to 30% according to their CFO, right? That's pretty hard to do. And that's the, again, it's a problem and an opportunity depending on what you do. A lot of folks, it's a problem. It's affecting their competitiveness, their ability to attract and retain talent. That's the other thing. A great health plan leads to great retention. The Rosen Hotels story that is in my TED Talk, where they've cumulatively saved over $500 million, their retention is 6 times better than their competitors because they've not only had this incredibly awesome health plan, which weaves in proper primary care that includes physical therapy and health coaches and things like that. And they've taken just 5% of what we call the dividend and invested in their community and invested in their employees. Their employees and their employees' kids get free college education. They get free subsidized healthy food. I mean, it's just incredible. And you can tell when you stay there, people love working there. Of course, they wouldn't want to leave. And they've got physically demanding jobs with, as maids and maintenance workers. And going back to that opioid scenario, when I wrote my second book, which looked at the opioid crisis,
right.
I went back to them and said, hey, what's the story on your opioids prescriptions? They're like, I don't know, we'll have to pull a report. And they never put in an anti-opioid program, but they just did primary care right, as I mentioned. And consequently, they had 1/6 of the level of prescriptions that a normal employer would have in the US, which basically puts them at where the rest of the world is. They essentially don't have an opioid problem because they've got good primary care. I mean, it's kind of that simple.
Wow. It's interesting to hear these stories, and obviously I've read some of the books. For an employer to become educated, you mentioned some of the resources that you have. What are some of the first steps that they've got to take, and in that education? Because if I'm in manufacturing, I'm making widgets. The healthcare industry looks pretty ominous to me. It's this big, non-transparent, opaque thing that just costs me money and gives me headaches. Where do they start?
Yeah, I mean, really where we talked about to begin with around education, we have this 5-step change process that spells out an acrostic local. And the first L in local is just leave behind status quo mindset. It's just a mindset shift. If you believe that solving healthcare is like trying to solve Middle East peace or something like that, that seems maybe impossible or out of your control, you're right. If you don't believe that, you're also right. So that's the biggest thing, is just like belief that you can do it. That's what Mr. Rosen and you did. I know you've got a really high plan grade for your employees. And then the second piece is optimize plan infrastructure. It's kind of the master key that unlocks the other doors. It's just work with the right advisor, work with the right set of companies, clean up those contracts. That's actually been our biggest investment, other than our own people, is in essentially assembling the dream team of contract attorneys in this space so that we can level the playing field. It's been an incredibly imbalanced playing field. And there's actually an example that I wrote about in the book. I think a company in your neck of the woods that before they changed any other stuff, which I'm going to talk about in a second, they found $1,000 per employee per year of savings for a 1,000-person company. That was $1 million of savings before they did the other thing, just by scrubbing the contracts, reviewing claims that came through on the existing networks. There's always I worked in hospital billing earlier in my career. I can tell you it's a mess, and there's always errors and duplications, and you might call it fraud in some cases. So that's an opportunity. The C I talked about earlier is carve out PBM. So you got to have that with a high ethics PBM, and you don't even before you change formulary where people pick up medications, there's opportunities if you do those things, like you work with an independent community pharmacist, hugely untapped resource. So that's, each step, right? And in fact, 4 of the 5 steps, the first 3 can be invisible to the member. So if you're worried about disruption, they can be invisible to the member. It's only the 4th step that people will notice, but in a good way. We've talked about it. Advanced primary care, direct primary care, right? They will notice in a good way, right? They finally can get in to see their doctor there. And when they're in there, it's not a drive-by appointment, these types of things. And that's really at the heart of Rosen and many of these other successes. And it's not a state secret. There's no well-functioning healthcare system in the world not built on proper primary care. We systematically destroyed it over the last 20, 30 years in the US. And so now it's getting rebuilt. And it's only the 5th step that if it's not in the hands of a professional, it's called leave behind value extracting PPO networks. Pulling no punches there. That is the greatest opportunity for savings, but you need to be smart about how you do it. Like in the case of Pacific Steel and Recycling, they just put in a bunch of direct contracts, very fair, very simple contracts. In a couple of years, they had 5,000 direct contracts. He's like 2-page agreements. Most docs, clinics would go, oh, this is great. This is better than what we're getting paid by the carriers or Medicare. I'll take this any day. And we can solve problems that they have in terms of patient accounts receivable, because that's part of it. Like, hey, we'll give you this price. We'll pay you on a timely basis, and there'll be no cost sharing by the member. You don't have to be in the, I've yet to meet the doctor or PT or any clinician who went to med school or PT school so they could become bill collectors. And that's what a lot of them have been turned into. So those are some of the steps. Again, you can take it a step at a time. There's a few people who rip off the Band-Aid, do the whole deal because they're so fed up. Great. We'll support that too. But most people want to take it a step at a time. And that's kind of the idea with that plan grader report is, hey, here's all the things you could do. When you work with a good advisor, they will say, yeah, here's the 2 or 3 things I would recommend we tackle this year. And here's why. And maybe you're going to need to make this decision or, have this resource or whatever. But it can be step by step by step. And it's just getting on that journey. And it's very straightforward.
It when you talk with a company like that and they put together, would you say, I made hundreds or thousands of contracts,
Yeah.
That's a burden for a company, in a way. How do they administer that and actually execute on something like that? Because for most people, they'd say, it's, and I'm just gonna renew and sign up for my usual pain that the Buka card gives me.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And first of all, it's the 5th step, so you don't have to do that right away. But the reality on the ground is you don't have to do that. There are companies that we work with who are actually putting together those agreements, and they end up not being a one-off agreement. Like if you're from the healthcare delivery side, you're like, hey, I like this. I'm happy to make that available to anybody in your community. In the Health Rosetta community, we collectively steward 5 million lives. And so there's companies that will do that on your behalf that we've vetted, and they're not value extracting PPO networks. We call them transparent open networks or open aggregator agreements. We do it. We don't hold it like our little ring, for Gollum and Lord of the Rings as our little precious thing we hold on to. This should just be a fair price for everybody.
Right.
And that fair is on both sides. It's got to be fair to the clinicians. One of the amazing examples we've had that's a real American comeback story in Ohio. You talked about the manufacturing base. This is a medical desert. They have less than 30% of the number of docs in their community relative to the rest of the state. But now that we put in this good framework with a bunch of employers, a couple DPC docs have come in, the top surgical facility, one of the top in the country, but they were actually having people travel a couple hours. It was worth it to get highest quality, no cost share surgeries. That organization put in a clinic. And so it's a real win-win, right? If you do that, there are folks, I mean, I'm obviously preaching to the choir here, that they want to work under a fair agreement with employers without value extracting middlemen. And so, yeah, we just streamline that work. I mean, that's the beauty of technology and good contracts. It doesn't have to be a burden for the employer.
Do you find that, you know, a lot of physicians, especially the specialists, have, you know, they've gotten used to a certain amount of business and now here comes this new way of getting paid, this direct contract, if you will. Is there a crossover point, or do they have to kind of continue to live in that hybrid system where they're doing some insurance work and some, you know, direct contracting?
Yeah, I mean, that is ultimately their call, right? This is a free country. They can do what they want. Some
Right.
will go cold turkey, you know, and, you know, we all are thankful for the Keith Smiths of the world who've done that. Most have a hard time doing that at this stage. And so they will have some hybrid. Now, they're interested in weaning themselves off of that as much as possible. And that's where, you know, in the case of like, you know, some of these, right, they can have that be a lower and lower percentage of their business, and there's more direct. And as, you know, and we really believe in the power of local word of mouth. And so that's what, you know, there's so many employers in that locale that are doing this. It's becoming a new normal. And so then when, I don't know what the mix is for, it's Crystal Clinic is the name of the organization, but I bet a very high percentage of their business in Northeast Ohio is just direct without the carriers. And, you know, that's, again, it's up to them how they want to do that. Obviously, there's a big administrative burden on the insurance front that if they can shed it, they will. But, you know, they may be used to it. So we don't force either way onto them.
You kind of touched on it there a little bit with a couple comments about your last book of localizing health. I'll try and get that out. And you know, I would say that where I'm at in Arizona is kind of the opposite of a medical desert. We have a very high, you know, medical system here, but it's tremendously costly as well. And you know, when you mention localizing health, I'll get that out. When you mention that, you know, can you give a little bit more specifics on what you're referring to, and how can we, as providers and employers, kind of take back control in our local area here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways to come at that, but one is sort of something people are familiar with, but they don't think about in healthcare, which is shop local, right? You hear about that with food, you hear about that with retail, and the notion of dollars recirculating in a community and the impact of that. And so, you know, obviously it's going to vary by size of community, but I'll just take the one I'm in, which is a lot smaller than Phoenix. But the numbers are pretty manageable and easy to do the math. So there's about 250,000 people in the county that I live in. We're north of Seattle by an hour or two. And there's so if you look at the per capita spend with 250,000 people across all ages, we're spending $2.5 to $3 billion all in on healthcare. Very, very, very conservatively, at least $1 billion of that is extracted out of our local economy via the PBMs, the carriers, out-of-town owned health system, that sort of thing, that even if we only repatriated 10% of that billion that's extracted out of our local economy, imagine what that impact would be and what that would mean to wages, to, you could repurpose that for any number of things to address food deserts or social services or education, right? You have incredible opportunity there. And so that's a big part of that. And the nice thing is you can have this, and, I go back, again, it can happen in Phoenix. It's happened, in Ohio and other places. You can do stuff for a singular employer, and the impact on the employee when you put it in is the next day, right? It is life-changing. It's really cool. People could not afford to go to the doctor, afford medications, these sort of things. The next day, it's life-changing. But as you get that word of mouth, in parallel, you're doing this systemic change. And, you see this in some other examples. You've seen it in some food areas. You've seen it on the built environment, like the way buildings are built is radically different today than 25 years ago. And it happened kind of locale by locale, where there was, in that case, there was a standard that we use as an analogy called the LEED standard. And we had this sort of theory that we call the rule of threes. And it's actually turned out to be better than this so far. The idea was you got 3 employers in a given locale working with the right benefits advisor, and you have some in Phoenix. They do 3. It's enough to kind of understand the local landscape, build some new muscles. Maybe you're doing things a little differently, and again, kind of some basic capacity building. And then you get to 3 squared, 9. At that point, some of the, clinical delivery organizations actually recognize this. They're not afraid of, I don't see this fancy national logo here. Before, maybe they're scared. Now they're like, we got a direct contract. We love it. In fact, we're going to put them to the head of the line. You're getting a case study or 2. And then when you get to, our theory was, you get to 3 cubed, 27, that's about 5% of the employers in a given area. The market would tip in terms of word of mouth. Well, it turns out it's actually been less than that so far. And there's actually a TED talk about revolutions. And it says that you only need 3.5% of a given population to sort of enable a revolution or a large scale system change, because 3.5% of the population, they know everybody, right? We all know several people. And that's what's happened. And the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that status quo uses to protect the status quo doesn't work anymore, because they can see it with their own eyes. Like they can, hear all this mumbo jumbo, but like, hey, let's go to look at Spooner PT. Hey, let's go look at Acme Corp. What are they doing? Man, look at this hotel company. They're having incredible impact on their employees and their retention. And then it just becomes the new normal. And so it's grinding work initially, kind of go from that cold start. But if you have a focus group, and I will tell you, in terms of Arizona, there's actually a firm there that every one of they're the only one that I know of that's a decent sized firm. Every one of their benefits advisors they bring in are coming into the Health Rosetta program, and they're all in on this. Like, this is the way they're going to build their business. And that's where you see the shift. The old guard is going to kind of defend it until that last bit of their cash cow, dries up. Others are going, hey, this is a once in a career industry shift, once in a lifetime, probably. I mean, the last major shift was, when Medicare passed. And, back then it was the greatest generation, and boomers were kind of the design point. Today, right, the biggest chunk of the workforce are millennials. And millennials and Gen Z are now almost 75% of the workforce. And so that's something where, of course, they have different requirements. And back then it was about acute care. Today it's about chronic care, chronic conditions, mental health, right? So you have to have a reset. And a lot of what the old plans try to do, and call it innovation, is the equivalent of, putting icon stickers on rotary phones and saying, oh, these are our new shiny health plans. No, you got to have a reset. And that's how we got smartphones, by doing a reset, not by tweaking, rotary phones.
Right. There's a question in the chat, and Jose, I'll go ahead and answer this because I just went through this process myself. I was with the Health Rosetta advisor, but his business was not growing, and so I did a search and really interviewed probably 6 to 8 of the larger firms around town. And one of the groups that Dave is mentioning here is called the Mahoney Group, and that they're the ones that are doing the Health Rosetta, and that's ultimately one of the ones that I chose, or the one that I chose. Couldn't be happier. They are on the ball, but I'm not having to explain things to them as far as how to differentiate a plan. Having taken a deep dive myself about 6-7 years ago, it became apparent that if you're going to, there is a chance to fix things, and if you're going to fix things, you got to have the knowledge. What Dave's saying is makes perfect sense. If you had to kind of describe the growth, I mean, kind of when you maybe take us back to the origin of Health Rosetta to today. What's happening? What's the size and scope, if you can kind of illustrate that a little bit? Because some people are just they're sitting on the sidelines going, when they get a little better at this, maybe I'll jump in. But we've already talked about the financial impacts of not doing it. But what is the size and scope of the movement today?
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned early on, I had to really dig hard. I mean, I found about 5 examples when I wrote that CEO's guide around the country. And that's where I joked I was the archaeologist. Now we did essentially like a sequel or add-on to that book. It was called The CEOs Who Restored the American Dream. And we had to stop at 100 pages of case studies. And they're in every corner of the country, small employers, large employers, medium-sized, rural and urban settings, public and private sector. We've got about 5 million lives stewarded by these about 250 advisors we've accredited around the country. And so, we still have a long ways to go, right? There's a lot of people who don't know about this, but we are dramatically different. I really feel like in terms of our effort, because we built out a technology platform to make it a lot easier. And I felt like, Plan Grader is one dimension of that. I feel like for a few years, probably the first 5 years, we were building a skyscraper and we were below street level. We're finally above street level, where people can really see it. And largely, we just kept our nose, head down, nose to the grindstone. And, it's sort of painful sometimes, like we're not that good at our marketing or our communication, but it was kind of a conscious choice. One, we're resource constrained, but like, hey, we could have the perfect messaging, but if we don't have years and years and years and thousands of lives that we've proven it out on, it won't matter because people are going to be rightfully skeptical. People have had good ideas, talked a big game, and we're like, the only thing that's really going to work is them talking to their peers. And, and that's why we have the webinars, we have, Rosetta Fest, and, the Fest and Rosetta Fest is a festival of success. There's so many around the country. And we're really, really hard graders on that plan grade. Like if you're above 50, you're pretty good. Like you're way above the rest of the country. There's only 3% that are above 80. But the rewards are huge. And essentially you have a low plan grade, and most of the status quo plans are about getting 5 to 20 out of 100. You have high volatility, high unpredictability. If you have a high plan grade, you have low volatility, and you can basically make healthcare a predictable, budgetable, truly valuable benefit versus something that's like, man, you hear they're going to have open enrollment. And it's like they got to bribe you with pizza to come or whatever, and you're going to just hear the great news that you get to pay more and get less. I mean, that's what basically people have become accustomed to over the last 20 years. And it just doesn't have to be that way. So it's a choice. If you want to overpay, if you want to facilitate preventable medical mistakes in the opioid crisis, then continue on the status quo. And that's our experience. You lead with quality and outcomes, you're going to get the cost savings along for free.
Yep, I think there's some of my mentors. I said, do the right thing for the right reason, and good things will happen. And it's no more evident than in healthcare. I know Dr. Johnson is chomping at the bit there. I think he's chewed off his microphone because I had the questions initially. So and others that if you would like to ask Dave a question, we have a few minutes left here before we have a scheduled this for an hour, but would be happy to take your questions. You can throw them in the chat. But I know Dr. Johnson has a couple he wants to tee up.
Well, the one that's burning in my mind is one that we've attempted to answer a couple of times. And Dave, you've made some great points about getting started, but would you talk a little bit more about the emotion in the position of the CEO trying to make changes to their plan for, both for the reasons of trying to help their employees and for, just trying to make sure that their company stays viable. What are some of the emotions that you expect those business leaders to feel, and how do we help them through that?
Yeah, most of them have just sort of accepted, like, it's got to be this way. And they've been told, like, hey, we can make your premium increase suck 20% less, but this is just what it is. It is what it is. And they've been led to believe that. And a lot of times they've been working with people who maybe, to give them full sort of benefit of the doubt. A lot of those people have sort of lived inside of this little box of this is what's possible. And I'm going to make this little box suck a little bit less. But there's a whole other world out there. And once they realize that, again, get that second opinion with this plan grader. You don't have to do anything with it, but you should know. And by the way, there is actually a legal duty that's one of the highest duties under the law that's gotten a lot of teeth added to it recently. So in the regulatory environment, I don't lead with that, but there is a serious exposure there. And most people, one of the big four risk management practice leaders, one of the big accounting firms, called it the largest undisclosed risk they'd seen in their career, the ERISA fiduciary risk, to get wonky on you. But then part of that journey sometimes is they have this person, they like them, they're a buddy, they might golf with them, or they, they're a cousin, or, somebody's nephew or whatever. And it's rough because at a certain point, they will find they're going to have this feeling that's almost like the business equivalent of finding out your spouse cheated on you, right? That's a hard thing, right? Somebody you trusted. And in some cases, again, full benefit of the doubt, we found with some of the people who came into our movement, they didn't even know half the revenue streams their firm was getting. They were just in their box. And they're like, what? My firm gets all these other things? I didn't know that. And we found up to 18 different undisclosed revenue streams. That doesn't feel real great when you learn that. And so, that's not always the case. And again, there's a law there that we were very instrumental in as an example, where you have to disclose those revenues. And if you're just hearing for the first time, there's a new law that requires the employer to report on the compensation their benefits broker is getting. You got a problem, right? Because the benefits brokers know this. It is all over the industry, this scary new, disclose your fees. And I'm like, this is craziness, right? Other high value professionals, clinicians being one example, lawyers, accountants, they charge a lot of money, but they're worth it, right? If you're good at your craft in benefits consulting, you should get paid well and fairly. You should, if you are embarrassed about what you're getting paid and you don't disclose that, is there anything more to be said?
Yeah. And you can help people through this by saying, hey, we know you have a relationship here, but here's a second opinion. Here's the plan grader. Here's another way of looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of it is, and again, I'd like to try to stay on the positive. Like the CEOs who come to Rosetta Fest and that we put on webinars, they love health benefits. This is their competitive advantage. This is a source of funds they thought was just out the door. And generally companies budget a certain amount for employees, and $1 on benefits is the same kind of them on as $1 on payroll. They'd like it to all go into the employees' pockets. That's why they're spending all that money. So suddenly to be able to offer these things, I mean, CEOs will tell us stories. Employees coming to them with tears in their eyes. There was a convenience store owner, and there was a worker there making, I don't know, $12-15 an hour. She had never, ever had a vacation since she was married and had kids because of the cost or copay of her medication. This plan came in, there was no reason for the copay. They paid less, they're happy to pay 100%. And so she was able to take a vacation for the first time since she'd been married and had kids. I mean, that's a big deal, right? And it's really impactful when people can get the care they need, get the dollars in their pockets, be able to save money for college education for their kids, whatever the goals. Like everybody has different dreams and goals. And if we just imagine all that waste, right? Larger than the entire Russian economy is what we waste in the healthcare system. That's what keeps me going, right? Is the stories that I hear from members via the advisors we accredit. I mean, because it's tough work. It's not like we have an unbroken string of successes. It's tough work, but it's what we're called to do. It's a lot easier when you hear those stories. And, you can be like Santa Claus for your employees when you put this out there because they just can't believe it. What? I can get a doctor 7x24 and they're available by text and I don't pay a dime and I'm not a senior exec. Like, what world am I living in? Like, that's just very different than what most people are used to.
I love it. And let me just give, an endorsement of your work from my perspective. I've been working with Health Rosetta plans for 5 years now and 4 years now. And I can tell you that that when companies are forward thinking enough and care enough to invest in the actual care, to invest in taking care of humans with better health care, we see people, healing from long held wounds, emotional and physical. And we see people who are turning their lives around in other ways because we've invested more time and energy into their well-being. And that's really what brings me to this work is not that I, went to medical school thinking that I wanted to be really involved in insurance and health, and the health system.
Yeah, me too. Not that I'm a doc, but I never thought I would be in this part of the industry.
But because I see that this is actually making a difference and allowing medical providers to give the kind of care that people really deserve, and allowing patients to heal, get better, get what they need. And so I'm just really appreciative of the work that you do. And I am appreciative of you, Tim, for leading the way here. You've been a great leader in putting solutions in place for your people. And so I am just thankful for you guys taking the time today. And we will be posting some of this online here soon. So for those of you who are listening, you'll be able to come back and find find some more. And I just also wanted to make an invitation to for those of you who are interested in being a part of this movement. One of the best things that you can do is actually sign up for the Free Market Medical Association, and also check out Health Rosetta. You may not be a broker or somebody who is directly involved in providing insurance benefits, but as Dave has said, there's employers who go to the Rosetta Fest who get education and access to these solutions. So this is a great way for you to get the solutions you need to better take care of your employees.
Yeah, well, I'll needle my clinician friends and say, because they'll be lamenting about, this carrier or that carrier. And I'm like, okay, what do you do for your health plan? And then they'll like, oh, well, I get it from, this mega carrier. And it's like, interesting. And the thing that sometimes is a misperception is you got to be a big organization. If you're 5 or more employees on the health plan, you can do a lot of things. It gets, there's some things if you're under 5, you can do a little harder. Over 50, it gets even easier. But there's definitely things that can be done, when you're above 5, and most folks are above 5. And even if they're not above 5, we can point you to some good resources. And so think about how powerful it is. And we have this where clinical leaders, in tech, we call it eating your own dog food, right? They have these type of plans themselves. And then to go out to employers and say, hey, wouldn't you like the same health plan that your, physician, your PT has for themselves, their family, and their team, and then put them on that journey? That's a powerful message. And so even as a small employer, you are in the healthcare business, whether you like it or not, from just the health benefits side of it. So take advantage of that. And also, clinicians are the most trusted professions in America. That's the other needling I'll give to my, clinician friends. Like, hey, your neighbors you go to church with, your golf buddies, you go to the Cardinals game together, whatever. Start educating, right? They will listen to you. And especially if you're walking the talk. And I don't know anybody other than those who are profiting from the dysfunction who are happy with the system. And so to be able to let them know there's something out there, it's just very powerful. And I'm glad you're, in the FMMA setting talking about this. And I hope all of you, right, are talking to your peers, talking to your neighbors, and there's a lot of power in your hands that you may not have taken advantage of yet.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And we will be back in 2 months with our September edition of the Arizona chapter of the Free Market Medical Association. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dave. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Okay, sounds good. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.